Welcome in, Rick Gaiman here, and this is a brand new episode of 300 Yards to Unknown, and I'm very, very excited about this one because I've got Lou Stagner on, and if you follow Lou on Twitter, you know exactly where this conversation is going. It's big data and how it relates to our game of golf, and it's fascinating stuff. Lou and I wish I could say we think at the same level, but we're kind of in the same universe, but he is so sharp with all of this data, and now with his work with Arccos, which is an on-course system that recreational players can track their own data. We are just living in a world where there's more information than ever, and Lou is on the forefront of taking that data, making it usable, communicating it to guys like me who can hopefully pass it on to everyone else. It's fascinating. I'm really excited about it, and I hope you enjoy it. All right, let me welcome in Lou Stagner. And Lou, I'm super excited about this. Obviously, the intersection for us is kind of big data and golf, and I don't know if there's anybody better than you to chat with this about. So thank you so much for the time. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, Rick, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, so let's just start with the general background, right? I mean, we are now living in a world in 2022 where there's a ton of data in the world of golf, but it hasn't always been like that. So how did you get started to become this this data nerd like I am, and how did you now get connected with Arccos, which I'm excited to chat about?
Yeah, so I've been working in analytics for over 20 years now in corporate America. I was working in analytics before they called it that, computer science grad, and got into software development, and that morphed over pretty quickly into what they called reporting back then. And then as that field grew, I expanded out into doing more and more of it, and now. I work for a company in corporate America, a large privately held company, and I run the analytics team. And we do everything from simple, basic reporting to machine learning, predictive analytics, and everything in between. And so I've been in this field for a while, and I started in golf. It's been a little bit over 3 years now. And I started with just creating a blog on golf analytics. And I told my wife that I was going to create a blog on golf analytics to kill some time here in the Northeast. And she shook her head and she's like, you are so much fun at parties. And I did it to kill some time. And I never thought that it would amount to anything. I never intended it for it to amount to anything. And now I get to do some really cool stuff and get to chat with some really cool people. So it's been a really fun ride.
Yeah, your Twitter feed alone is just a treasure chest of unbelievable stuff. Things that I couldn't even have considered, whether it's distances in elevation, driving distances and elevation change, or putts made throughout the day. All of that good stuff. But we haven't always been here, Lou. Right? I mean, it used to be fairways and greens. It used to be putts per round. Like, how did we get here? Because it feels like the evolution of golf data, it's going a million miles an hour at the moment.
Well, I think we all have Mark Brody to thank for that, right? And so much of what's happened has been because of strokes gained. And he created that back, to, I think his first paper was maybe 2008, 2009. Don't quote me on that. And you would probably know this better than me, but I think strokes gained punting was maybe 2011 on the PGA Tour when they first implemented that.
Yeah,
they
because
first
most
put it
people
into play.
don't realize that even when the ShotLink era started, putting wasn't broken out separately, right? And then that came later. Yeah.
Well, they actually, and again, I don't know all the details on it, but from what I've read about it, they started ShotLink 2004, and I think they were tinkering around with it a little bit before then, but they had all this data and they really weren't doing anything with it in the early years. And so when you went on the PGA Tour website back in 2005, there was no ShotLink, shot level information available. It wasn't until Brody kind of came along and engaged with them and came up with the concept of strokes gained and implemented that. And they first started with putting, and then they expanded that to the rest of the game. So, the reason we're here is Mark Brody, without a doubt. So we all have him to thank for that. And then it just continues to grow and expand. And there's lots of really neat things that people are doing with it.
Yeah, there's a lot of different layers of that. So let's start with the top guys, the professionals who have access to their tournament rounds, the strokes gained, the ShotLink metrics. We're seeing, I think, a lot of the younger guys, a lot of the guys that are coming up through college who are kind of always been in the data world, they seem to embrace this a lot quicker, but now it's almost like unlocking a key for some of these guys who have been on tour for a while to know, hey, is this a risk reward shot that I want to take on? Is this a course that sets up well for me? There's a lot of different ways that the highest level of players deploying this newfound data.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of credit is owed to Scott Fawcett.
Yeah.
So Scott Fawcett created Decade, and so Scott took what Brody created with strokes gained, and then he wrapped some math around that to figure out how it could be used to sort of untangle course strategy. Right. And it's just it's a fundamental way to play the game. I think of golf like blackjack. And when you go play blackjack, so you live in Las Vegas, you know more about blackjack than I do. But the first time you go and play blackjack, they give you, if you've never played before, you get a card. I'm sure you've seen those cards.
Little chart, yeah.
Right, a little chart. And the point of those charts are, here's your basic rules. And these are the rules you want to follow given the situation. And they give you that, and you follow those rules to optimize your odds long term. Now, the house always has the edge, but you try to optimize your odds as much as you can. And course strategy is really the same way. You're trying to optimize your odds. And if you really want to risk it at the casino, you can start to count cards. And when you count cards, you can adjust your bet size. And when the count's in your favor, you bet more so you can win more. When the count is not in your favor, you bet less so you can win less. And I think of strategy the same way. When things are going really well for you, you can adjust and you can get a little more aggressive. And when they're going really poorly for you, you can adjust and get a little bit more conservative. And that's one thing that a lot of golfers don't do. When they're playing bad, they often press, which is the worst thing you can do.
That's what you shouldn't be doing.
That's what you shouldn't be doing. And so you should always adjust towards the conservative when things are not going well, which is, for guys like us, that's probably more often than not.
That's fascinating. I've not heard the counting cards to golf strategy analogy yet, but it makes complete sense. And I think that's what we're seeing guys try to do in real time, right? If you're Bryson DeChambeau, you can pull driver everywhere, but I guess there has to be some real-time aspect of it of saying, okay, I don't have my best stuff today. My dispersion might be a little wider than I would like it to be. I'm going to go conservative as opposed to just saying, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to go all in and be aggressive here.
Yeah, that's a great way to think of it. And that's how I look at it, is when things are going south, your shot dispersion is going to get bigger. And when your shot dispersion is getting bigger, we're going to need to adjust a little bit farther away from trouble. And it's, there's no perfect science to it. We're always guessing. We're guessing about a lot of factors, but hopefully when you put enough effort into understanding your own patterns, the situation, you can apply things as intelligently as possible. And that's certainly better than doing nothing. It's certainly better than standing up there not knowing what to do or how to do it, or just always firing at the flag. Those are things that are going to end in higher scores for you. Yeah,
it's so fascinating. And a lot of the pros, they at least know what their strengths and weaknesses are, because it's so easy to say, well, I'm Victor Hovland and I rank 180th around the green, and I know that that's something that I need to work on because it's easy to compare myself to my peers. Are you understanding, or are you under the impression that a lot of tour pros are using these advanced metrics to at least identify their strengths and weaknesses, things they should be working on, and then kind of taking the next steps after that?
Yeah, there's clearly a lot of tour players that are looking at this information, and they're looking at it probably in more ways than what you would find on PGAtour.com.
Yeah.
You just brought up around the green, and around the green, when I look at it, when I'm working with a player or coach, I don't just look at it in terms of what they gain at a round level. I look at it in terms of what they gain at a shot level, because not every player gets the same number of attempts around the green.
It's a counting stat. Yeah. If you're missing more greens, you have an opportunity to gain more around.
You have an opportunity to gain more, right? Like, so it put in, basketball terms to make it easier for people to understand. If you average 10 free throws a game and I average 7 free throws a game, and let's say that, you made 6.8 out of 10 per game, and I made 6.5 out of 7 per game.
Right.
Yes, you made more than me per game, but I was definitely a much better free throw shooter than you were. And so
per shot basis is a
per shot basis for some things can be another way to look at it. I don't want to call it better, but just a different way to think about it.
And I imagine we're going to continue to evolve. I mean, I've had kind of scratched the surface conversations with some guys about using it to set their schedule, right? What courses set up well for them? How do they do on different levels of rest? It's seemingly like golf metrics is going to turn into like trucking logistics, right? Just the optimal path to everywhere and making sure that the body is in the best shape. And when you get to a course, it's one of the better spots for you. Now, that, of course, Lou, only goes for the guys who have the luxury of really choosing their schedule, not having to tee it up every single week.
Yeah, and we, you can use stats to understand and make some of those decisions. So, do you have a home course you typically play at?
I do. There's a course out here called Paiute. They have 3 courses actually, so I get
perfect.
to
So pick one of those courses. Does the wind generally blow the same direction most of the time?
Yes.
Yeah. So that happens at most golf courses, right? You have generally a prevailing wind. Now, anything can happen on any given day, and I'm just giving you one example of how a player might think through how they pick a golf course. Players have differing levels of skill depending on wind direction. So there are some players we'll take like off the tee. Hitting as a right-handed player with wind at your back is generally the toughest wind for a right-handed player off the tee or any shot. But there are some players that are impacted a lot more than other players. There are some players, when you put it in context of how much they would gain per round, it's easier to think of that on a per round level instead of a per shot level for driving. There are some players where with a wind at their back, they would lose 3/4 of a shot more per round off the tee compared to a wind on their chest.
Why is that, Lou?
That's a really good question. We asked a few players about that, or I've asked a few players. We had Victor Hovland on our podcast last year, and he actually does really good in a left to right wind. And I asked him that question, and I said, why do you think you do so good in a left to right wind? And he said a couple of things, but one of those things was I think I aim a little bit farther left than I used to. And so sometimes I think that's what players are doing is the wind is causing more of an impact to move their ball to the right, and they're just adjusting enough to the left. But knowing that about your own game and knowing what a wind typically does at a golf course is something that a player could look at to say, this course maybe sets up well for me. And it's one of the many things that a player can look at to try and figure out what might suit their game.
I love that. Well, it's not only the pros, Lou, the recreational players are getting access to more data as well, because with this great technology, launch monitors are becoming more prevalent. And of course, you can get a TrackMan for tens of thousands of dollars, or for a couple $100, you can get something that, quite honestly, for me, the difference between a yard or two, not a big deal. I don't need it to be super accurate, but we've never been in a time where 15 handicaps know or have the ability to know as much about their game because of launch monitors and eventually like the Arccos system that we're going to talk about. But I think for guys like me, knowing the data we've never known before is actually even more valuable because I was dealing with nothing previously.
Yeah, launch monitors have come such a long way. I actually just got a new one. I got the Bushnell Launch Pro.
Okay.
Which is the same. It's the same exact model as the Foresight GC3. Yeah, exactly. And it's great. It's amazing. I absolutely love it. It's clearly the poor man's GC Quad. But it gives me such incredible information. They've benchmarked it against the quad, and it's very accurate. Awesome. They're not paying me to say any of this. I wish they were. If they want to, they can reach out.
Yeah, I will also say whatever they would like.
Yeah, they can reach out, but it's great. And the information that I get from it, not only ball data, but the club data that comes with it is so helpful. And when you're working with an instructor and they give you things to work on and things to look for and things to shoot for, we now have information that tells us exactly what we're doing, where previously we were probably guessing or we may have been, if we were diligent, taking an old camcorder to the range with us and trying to film us in horrible quality video. I did that 20 plus years ago, and it was useless now that I think back at it. But yeah, it's come so far with what's available for players these days.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because you really do, if I slice a ball, there's a variety of reasons I could slice a ball, right? And when you start getting into not only the ball data, but the club data and the angle of attack and your club path, all of that stuff allows you to kind of find the root problem that you can say, okay, this is what I need to work on to hopefully then fix the slice, not just figure out a way to hit the ball straighter. Right.
Yeah, for sure. It's so valuable. I'm working with an instructor remotely now, and I am able to send him all my data. And I have a couple of other toys that I tinker with to send him data and give him information. And it allows us to have these very effective lessons remotely. He doesn't have to be here with me. He can see and know exactly what's going on and provide guidance. I also send him some video of the swing as well, but we're able to do that where 15 years ago it would have been very challenging to do that effectively.
Right. That's awesome stuff. Well, you recently, as of a couple of months ago, joined the Arccos team, Data Insights Lead, and this my ears perked up, Lou, when I saw this, because I'm an Arccos guy. I've got the sensors. I've got the sensors on my club. I think I measured 22 rounds or something like that last year, and this is even the next step. This is not launch monitors. This is on-course data. Every shot that I'm hitting is being tracked by that little sensor, and it all goes into whatever the computer system, and it can pump out strokes gained for me. This to me is, I feel like the Jetsons when I'm getting this information. I feel like I'm in the future because of how valuable and how real time it's coming in.
Yeah, it is an amazing system. I was super excited to join there and get to be a part of it. And when they unlock the keys to the database, so they have nearly 500 million shots, 500 million with a B, of amateur data. There's so much that I can do with it, and I've already started to put a few things out on Twitter here and there. And there's so much that we're working on that we have coming as well. I'm a kid in a candy store getting to play with all that data, and it's taken. People like me, I have been tracking my stats on the golf course for over 20 years. And I had this very intricate system. If you looked at one of my scorecards, it would have, looked like hieroglyphics. So you wouldn't have been able to interpret what was going on there. I tracked everything, and I would come back and I would put it into a spreadsheet, and it takes a special personality to put in that kind of effort to track that level of detail. And something like Arccos just allows you to turn on your phone. And let's see, I have one right here. A link. Do you have one of the links?
I have a link. Yes.
Yeah,
my first 10 rounds I didn't, and then I got the link, and it was awesome because I can just you clip it on your belt or whatever, and you go on about your business.
Clip it on the belt. You start your round before you play. You can actually leave your phone in the car if you wanted to. You don't even need to have your phone with you. Put the link on the belt. Go play. It tracks all your stats for you, and then when you're done, you get a tremendous amount of info to help you understand on-course performance, and it enables golfers that don't have I don't know what the correct way to say, but the diligence that I had with doing things by hand, it allows them to get some great info.
I love it. Well, 1,800 of those 500 million shots are mine. Now,
nice.
That seems like that's so much data, Lou, that I imagine can take you in a bunch of different directions. How do you begin to even say, okay, here's something I want to learn, here's something I want to dive deeper into, because it feels overwhelming when you say 500 million shots?
Well, it is overwhelming in quantity, but with what they're tracking and how they track it, it's easy for me to walk in and look at their data set and say, I'd love to look at this. I'd love to look at that. One of the things we're looking at right now is that we've just sort of worked through is looking at how challenging a short-sighted shot it changes the challenge level by how much green you have to work with. So think of a 20-yard shot. If you have a 20-yard shot and you only have 4 yards of green to work with because you've short-sighted it, that's extremely different than a 20-yard shot where you're a yard off the green and you have 19 yards of green to work with. Those are not even in the same league. And so we can understand that now based on all the data that they capture and the detail in which they capture that data. And we can look at that, and we can now, I don't want to pull the covers off of too many things, but there's some really cool things we're going to be able to do with data like that to help golfers out.
Well, helping golfers out, I feel like, is probably the reason that most people buy it, right? When I bought it, I love the data. I just kind of wanted to see the way my strokes gain metrics lined up. But at the same time, I want to get better, Lou. Like, I want to learn what my strengths and weaknesses are. I want to learn what my actual distances that I hit clubs are, because that, to me, I have a distance if I absolutely pure one. And I've got a distance if I hit it a little fat and all that stuff. But knowing kind of what your average is in real world scenarios, that alone made me so much better, which makes me think that most people could make really big strides in their game by just knowing a little bit more about their game.
That's a great way to put it. So what's your index now? You're about a 6 or something ish.
6.5.
Yeah, 6.5.
Yeah.
So what's the most important thing for a 6 handicap to work on? What do you think?
For me, it's 100 yards and in. I don't know what it is for everybody else.
Yeah, you answered it the right way. That's the right answer. And that's the beauty of a system like Arccos is, there isn't one thing. It's player specific.
Yeah.
And when you take a look at players, so players at your level, I can actually pull up a stat here and I can tell you in 2 seconds. So at your level, the biggest difference between skill gap is with putting. So at your level, if I look at all 6 handicaps, the biggest gap between when you look at all of the skills, so we have off the tee, approach play, around the green, and putting, those 4 categories. And when you look at the best in each category versus the worst in each category, putting has the biggest delta between the best and the worst. So the best putters are much better than the worst putters when you compare all of the strokes gained categories. And putting, it's almost 4 strokes. So I could find a 6 handicap that putts 4 strokes better per round than the worst putting 6 handicap.
And they're both 6s. Yeah.
They're both 6s, but there's 4 shots of difference in their putting skill.
Wow.
And so the importance of a tool like Arccos is if you don't have that, you don't really know. You're probably guessing a little bit. There's probably some bias in there that you are hurting yourself with by not really understanding those numbers. But when you have a tool like Arccos and you understand what your weakness is, you can focus on your weakness. That's kind of information you can give to your coach and say, here's what I'm doing on course. Oh, by the way, here's what I'm doing in practice with my launch monitor data, but here's what I'm doing on course. And you can see that I have this huge weakness in putting or approach play or off the tee, whatever it happens to be. And that allows you to intelligently focus your practice time to work on a weakness, which is going to help you get better a lot faster.
Yeah, and people, they want to see scores come down, and it's knowing what to work on. If I only have 30 minutes or 60 minutes to do something, maybe I'll just go bang drivers, or maybe I'll go to the putting green and actually work on, my 30 footers. There's actually something interesting, Lou, and I wish I remember who I heard this from, but basically the recreational golfer, from what I understand, they should really only be practicing like putts from 8 to 30 feet, something like that, because from 3 feet and in, most people are generally the same. From 40 feet out, 2 putts, sometimes there's 3 putts, but that range in the middle is where you can kind of make up a lot of strokes instead of making sure you're not 3 putting from 12 feet or something like that. That really starts to add up when you're talking about 18 holes, 36 holes, 100 holes.
Yeah, so I'm going to push back a little bit on some of your distance ranges there. And Brody covered this in Every Shot Counts. And in Every Shot Counts, 5 feet is roughly a pretty good distance to work at. And the way that I think of putting for amateur players is, inside of 3 feet, most of us are pretty solid inside of 3 feet, definitely inside of 2 feet. from that like 2 feet, 3 feet, depending on the skill level of the player, out to about 10 feet, those are makeable. And you have a lot of putts in that distance range. So those are really important. I would spend, if I had no time to spend on putting, or if I had minimal time to spend on putting, that's where I would focus. I would focus on that range. I wouldn't practice so much the 10, 11, 12 feet out to about 20 feet. I wouldn't hit any putts in that range. That's kind of the purgatory where you're going to make some of those. We don't want to 3-putt those. You know, it's speed control is manageable because we're still close enough.
Right.
For amateur players, once we get outside of, again, depending on skill level, anywhere from 16, 17 feet out to maybe 22, 23 feet for the lower index players. Outside of that, we want to start to work on speed control. Okay. And that's really all we're focused on at that distance is just get it close enough so I don't 3-putt. And speed control is going to drive almost all of that. So inside of 10 feet, roughly, don't look at anything from 10 to 20 feet, roughly. And then outside of 20 feet, work on speed control.
I love it.
The last thing I'll say about putting, so inside of 10 feet, you want to make sure that you're getting every single ball to the hole from that range, as many as you can. Now, we don't want to knock it 4 feet past. We want to have good speed control, but you want to make sure you're getting it to the hole. The farther away you get from the hole, the more your pattern, short, long, should be about 50%. So on the PGA Tour from 50 feet, they leave about 50% of their putts short from 50 feet. 50% are long from 50 feet. So for amateurs, it's a lot closer for amateurs. So when you get out to that 30, 35 foot range, you want to have half your putts finish short, half your putts go long, because your shot dispersion north-south, so short-long, is so big. We want to center it over the hole, and that will reduce the second putt by taking that approach. If you're trying to get everything to the hole on lag putts, you are going to take more putts to get the ball in the hole. Like when I play with my buddies, you know, they'll have a 40-footer and somebody will leave it 4 feet or 5 feet short from 40 feet, and they'll say, "Oh, I got to get it to the hole." From that distance, no, you don't. You just have to get it close enough where you have a reasonable chance to make the next putt. That's the only goal.
See, I love this because when you start getting into, you know, what your baseline skill level is, and of course everyone is different. You do this thing on Twitter that I love, which is basically manage your expectations, which I think is so critical. And most people, and I'm guilty of this as well, don't know how to manage their expectations. So I'll give you one from a tweet that you sent out at the end of last year, basically how often amateurs are getting up and down from 20 yards in the rough. Now, an 8 handicap, that's a pretty good player. 8 to 10 handicap is only getting up and down from 20 yards 28% of the time. And you know that if you're not getting up and down, they're swinging their club, they're smacking their leg, they're disappointed in that, when really everyone at your skill level is only doing it 28% of the time.
Yeah, I think I get some really interesting direct messages on manage your expectations. They're always fun to read. The one you just talked about is around amateur players. I put a lot of those tweets out there about professional players, and the comments are always enjoyable. The direct messages are always fun and interesting. But I think it's important to understand expectations that are, you know, relevant to your skill level, because I've found that there are players that have expectations that are extremely out of whack from what's reality. And so let's say you talked about 100 yards and in, and I know you have Arccos data and you can back this up, but let's say you didn't, and you thought that you were a bad wedge player. You thought you needed to improve your wedge play, but you were really a decent wedge player. And what happens, I think, with some players is because they have these warped expectations, when they hit a shot that's actually a reasonable shot, a good outcome, especially a good outcome for their skill level, they start to give themselves a hard time because they think it should be better. And when they start to give themselves a hard time, ironically, they then start to become worse at that skill, because now they're putting themselves in a position where maybe they have some anxiety now about hitting that shot. They're getting down on their game, and that is going to cause them to perform worse. So understanding what good is, I think, is a really important part of the game, and it helps you to stay sharp mentally on the golf course, which at golf at any level, having a solid mental game is such a key piece of the puzzle. And I think managing your expectations contributes to you being able to do that better.
Do you have any theories on why our expectations seem to be so warped? Do you think it's watching the professionals on television? Do you think that we only remember our best shots? Why so often seemingly are our expectations way off from reality?
That's a great question. I have no idea in golf. I'm a Bills fan, so go Bills. I don't think I can throw a football like Josh Allen.
I don't think you can either.
I don't know. I don't think I can dunk like LeBron.
Right.
Why do I think I should be able to hit iron shots like Colin Morikawa? I shouldn't, but for some reason, golfers have these crazy warped sense of expectations. I think golf on TV maybe drives some of that because most of what we see on TV is the PGA Tour they're the best players on the planet. And most of the time, we're only seeing the players that are on the top of the leaderboard. So we're watching the best players on the planet on a heater. And that's all we have, and for most of us, that's all we have exposure to. And sometimes the announcers can kind of feed the narrative a little bit. And I'm not picking. I could never be an announcer. I would stumble over my words. I would look foolish. But I think sometimes they feed that narrative, and it's pretty incorrect. And occasionally, I playfully beat them up a little bit over it. But I'll just say I have tremendous respect for all of them. I couldn't do that, but sometimes they're way off base with some of the things they say. And I think people hear that and they kind of translate that to their own game, and it causes problems for what, they think is good or bad.
Yeah, he's got a wedge in hand. He hits it to 18 feet. Oh, he's going to be disappointed in that one, when really that would make him like the greatest proximity player on planet Earth if he did it every single time.
Yeah, I posted a video last year, and I'm not gonna say who the announcer was, but it was JT, and he might have been out in a desert course somewhere. He might have been in your neck of the woods somewhere, and he was at a desert course. It was like 190-yard par 3. And he hit it, and the announcer said, he flared that one a little bit right. He's not going to be happy with that one. And it finished like 18 feet from the hole, and he gained 0.3 of a stroke on his approach play, and it was like the 12th best shot in the field that day. And I'm thinking, how can he possibly say that? That's a phenomenal golf shot. There's nothing bad about that shot. And, we see that and we hear that and we expect pros are hitting it to, 6 feet all day when they're just simply not doing that.
It really is. I understand how people would then, that would be their baseline expectation. They would look at themselves and say, I should at least be hitting this green when maybe you shouldn't be, depending on your skill set. But it is fascinating stuff. And I love the idea of being able to manage your expectations. I want to go back before I get you out of here, Lou, because, the conversation around leaving half of your putts short and kind of half of your putts long, I've never really heard that before. And it really got my brain going of like, yeah, I guess maybe I should have an equal split, because I just keep hearing, well, you can't make a putt that you leave short, right? And I feel like my brain has never heard be 50% on both sides of the hole.
That is only when you get to a certain distance away from the hole. So the farther you get away from the hole, remember we talked about inside of 10 feet, you want to get everything past the hole. And as you get farther away from the hole, that split needs to move more towards 50-50. So on the PGA Tour, that 50-50 split where 50% are short and 50% are long happens roughly at around 50 feet, give or take. For amateurs, I'll just make up a number for somebody at your level, a 6 handicap. That might be 32 feet or 33 feet, roughly in that range. So from 33 feet, you want to be about 50% short, 50% long. From 20 feet, we don't want to leave 50% short. From 20 feet, you're going to have a little better speed control. We want to get more to the hole, to have more that are going to have a chance to go in the hole. So maybe 30% of your putts are going to be short from 20 feet. Just kind of making some numbers up out of thin air for that skill level. So the farther you get away from the hole, the more you want that pattern to be 50-50. When you're in tight, inside of 10 feet, you want everything past the hole. Leaving putts short, you're leaving strokes on the table. But you just, again, from inside of 10 feet, you have to make sure you're not running them 4 feet past.
I love that.
So does that make sense?
It does. It gives me something to chew on. I'm going to start taking notice in my own game. That's very actionable. I love that, Lou. Lou Stagner on Twitter. Lou, you are awesome, my friend. I really appreciate you coming on and everything that you do, because every time you tweet or every time I see something, it gets my brain going. The data's right up my alley, and I really appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me on today, Rick. I really enjoyed the chat.